Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on how to estimate like an expert, 5 steps to more accurate financials. I'm Holly Gibson, Senior Product Specialist here at UDA Technologies, and I'm joined today by my colleague Jordan Davis, also Senior Product Specialist here at UDA.
Hello, everyone.
We couldn't be more excited to have you join us today. Now, for those of you who are new to ConstructionOnline or new to UDA Technologies, ConstructionOnline is our award-winning web-based project management platform, trusted by over 650,000 users all over the world, managing upwards of $80 billion plus in projects every single day. And one thing that we know from working with so many of you around the world is that the foundation for a successful project really does rest on accurate cost control. And the foundation of that, of course, is an accurate estimate and budget for your team to work with throughout the project. So today, we're going to highlight the best practices to achieve accurate dynamic estimates that are going to cover your project from start to finish, from that planning phase all the way through job costing and invoicing. So with that, we're going to be taking a look today at how to create estimates. So you'll learn how to do that from scratch, from a template, or using the ConstructionOnline Excel import. We'll talk about how to reproduce your success in future jobs by using estimate templates. This is something Jordan and I usually talk a lot about on the estimating front, and something that we're excited to share with you. It really can change your process so much. We'll also talk about the importance of company overhead and margin to ensure maximum profitability, and give you some ideas for how you can use the different markup and margin tools within ConstructionOnline estimating to achieve the results that you want from a profit standpoint. We'll also be looking at how to set region-appropriate tax rates for materials, services, or any other taxes that you're required in your area to collect. And then we'll also talk about how to integrate your change orders and selections with your estimates. So when we think about using the estimates start to finish on your projects, that's not only going to include putting together the initial estimate or budget, but how to take into account selection choices, changes that are happening. So we'll look at how those are integrated into on-cost estimating in ConstructionOnline.
Yeah, that's right. Now, this is a really popular topic. Holly and I have the fortune of working with so many of our clients to answer their questions about our financial tools inside of ConstructionOnline, and we're suspecting that as we move through the topics today, everyone who's joining us today is going to have questions as well. Holly and I are going to keep an eye on the questions panel inside of the GoToWebinar area, which, if everyone will go ahead and take a look now, you'll see a space titled Questions in your GoToWebinar panel as well. As we move through today, if you have questions, please send them our way. We want to make sure that we're addressing your needs and making sure that as we walk through our topics that, as things make sense, we'll answer your questions as we move through. Now, if there's some questions that come in and we've just maybe missed the beat, we'll also circle back and have a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. Now, because we have so much to cover today, let's go ahead and get started, Holly.
Sounds great. So as we dive into estimating and start to look at how to put those together, we do want to show you where we're starting today. So we've logged into my ConstructionOnline account for Gibson Construction, and I'm currently looking at my financial dashboard. So my estimating dashboard here is going to show me in aggregate how much I have in current active estimates. So I can see that for my company, I've got, looks like just over 20 million in current estimates. I can see how much of that is base estimated cost, how much of that's change orders, how much of that is company overhead and margin. So you can get some great information from ConstructionOnline by heading over to the company overview section, taking a look at those financial dashboards. But of course, to get here, we have to start with creating an estimate. So we want to show you today a few options for how to do that. And I think you're going to love how quick and easy it really is.
Yeah, that's right. For those who are just starting to use ConstructionOnline, and there are many of you joining us today, we understand that, you're working inside of a new platform, and, you might not actually have a template or something to import just yet. So we've made it really easy to just start putting together new estimates so that you can start producing proposals or bids or whatever you need. And to achieve that, all you have to do is make a new project, head into the Projects Financials menu, And from here, you'll automatically land in the estimating and really the budget section for the project, and you're ready to get started creating a new estimate from scratch.
Now, that's the first option we want to look at today. Jordan, like you mentioned in the beginning, you may not already have a template. So creating an estimate from scratch just allows you to build out the structure that you want. Now, our first step is going to be to just go ahead and give the estimate a name if we want something different than what ConstructionOnline does for us here. And then we're going to start to choose our estimate detail level.
Yeah, from here, there's a couple of choices right off the bat. What we've found inside of, the years that we've spent building out estimates, that some estimates that a company would put together don't really require that much detail. That's where our 2-level estimates come into play. We found more and more, though, that as we work through inside of really building out more detailed, more accurate estimates, that you really want to work with a more advanced estimate. And this has become a really popular choice for a lot of our clients moving forward.
Now, the difference here is that with your 2-level estimate, you're really tracking just that 2 levels. So typically that looks like categories and subcategories, whereas the advanced 3-level estimate is going to add in line items to that as well. So our structure will be category, subcategory, and line item. I'm going to choose that for my estimate today. And then the next choice I'll need to make is, what's our cost calculation method going to be? Do we want to use a standard calculation method where we're just going to multiply quantity times unit cost to give us our base cost? And in this way of doing it, each line item that you enter will be assigned a classification. So we'll assign that material, labor, subcontractor, equipment, or other. If you prefer more of a 5-column layout, your base cost is calculated by multiplying the quantity times a unit cost that you enter for each of those classifications, which will appear as columns across the top of your estimate. I'm going to use the standard calculation method. Both are great options. And then on our last step, we'll be able to assign tax settings for the estimate. So we'll talk a little bit later in today's webinar about how to assign those. If you have tax settings set up for your company, those are going to automatically be applied when you create a new estimate. In this case, I've chosen to do that on a project by project basis, so I currently don't have any taxes set up. We're going to go ahead and save our estimate now.
Yeah, that's right. We are definitely going to circle back to the tax settings, so no worries about that. But it is a nice preview so that you can get a taste of what's to come. And of course, from here, the new estimate is going to generate. Now, what is going to happen is we're going to start with a brand new estimate without anything really inside of it except for a few placeholder sections in the estimate. Now, we thought, before we move on to the other options or ways that you can create estimates, that it would be nice to touch on really how simple it is to actually build an estimate inside of ConstructionOnline. We've heard from current clients of ours that other systems, it's a little tricky to get started putting together estimates, but inside of ConstructionOnline, it's really very flexible and allows you to start building estimates your way, the way that works well for you and your team. You can see right off the bat, we're going ahead and setting up top-level categories. These are the highest-level containers. In some places, these can also be referred to as divisions. If you're not using some type of division-style breakdown, I've also seen companies use categories to track things like different phases for the project. I've seen other companies split out the categories by rooms instead of properties. The beauty of this system is that it's very flexible and allows you to build the estimate structure that works best for you. And we're really happy at the flexibility of the system and have seen so many different ways to build an estimate template that it's really something that we're proud of and really proud of our clients for taking hold of and making something great.
Definitely so. Now you'll notice as we've been kind of looking at the setup here, already I've been able to add a number of additional categories to my estimate sheet. So it really is so easy. What I like to do when I'm working with an estimate from scratch is use my project totals page to define the framework for my categories and subcategories. So here I'm going to have a planning category, a general category, excavation and site preparation, foundation, and then underneath these I may have some additional things that I want to track. So under planning, that might be things like design services. We might also add for planning something like renderings.
Don't forget the permits. Those are important.
Do permits here in this section, exactly. Under general, we might add things like project
Temporary
management
facilities.
fees, temporary facilities, that sort of thing. So you can go ahead and just start really building that out. And then when you're ready to jump into the category, you just click on it. And now you'll notice that I'm within this general tab. I have my project management subcategory. Maybe we'll go ahead and do some temporary facilities here. And then we can really start defining our line items. So that's going to be a really fast and easy way to build out my estimate.
Now, of course, if you're working inside of a 2-level estimate, we wouldn't really need to drill down into the categories and the subcategories to build out the line items, well, because there aren't any line items. So if you're looking for a down and dirty estimate, maybe one that you're putting together that's not as detailed or as complex as maybe a full-scale estimate like the sort we're building here, that would be the better option. But really, the 3-level estimates give you a lot of flexibility and control over the different components that make up all of the costs, and also allow you to later on build in markups and profitability across a wide range of different items.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you're building your estimate from scratch, what you'll want to do as you begin to fill out all of the sections here is you'll want to, kind of dive in and flesh out not only the name and the structure, but you'll want to look at things like assigning those classifications. Maybe this is going to be a labor item. You'll want to potentially enter in a detailed description. You might want to add notes, assign resources to the items throughout your estimate. And here is where, of course, you would also begin to enter the costing information, which you can do either as a unit cost times quantity or just a lump sum base cost if we just wanted to assign a value to this here. So super easy data entry, really easy to set up. Now, before we look at all the columns available, we want to back out just for a moment and look at some other options for getting started with or creating your estimate. Most of the best practices that we cover today will apply no matter if you are starting from scratch, whether you're using a template, which we would recommend, or importing from Excel. So we want to take a look at those other options for us right now.
Yeah, that's right. The next option on the plate is going to actually be the Excel import functionality. Now, we're not so naive to think that those companies out there who are successful, they don't have a template, right? That's not true, but it's probably in some type of spreadsheet program that isn't unified or connected across to other parts. In most cases, this is going to be an Excel spreadsheet. And of course, we're not going to knock Excel. It's a fantastic program. We've seen companies achieve a lot of success up to a certain point using Excel. But, you reach a point when your company's growing or when your team is growing that Excel just stops cutting it because it's not accessible. It's not easy to amend or adapt. Someone could make a mistake in the formulas inside of Excel, which really isn't possible inside of ConstructionOnline. All of the downsides that would really lead to moving to ConstructionOnline. But we didn't want to make you re-enter all of that hard work from scratch. So we built in a way that you can import your estimates from Excel. Now, of course, you can see we have an Excel estimate template option that you can download, which of course we've done and we've formatted for today. Our staff is adept at working with people to adapt their estimates into Excel templates to import. It works out really well, though. If you have gotten to the point where you've built your estimates inside of Excel and they work really fantastically for you, chances are you'll be able to handle the import function as well. But as far as actually importing, once you've set up and arranged your estimates so that they import into ConstructionOnline, all you have to do is find that file, select it, and open the file, give the estimate a name, and save the estimate into the project.
So for this, I have a template that's just my sort of standard commercial master template form that I use. I have that in an Excel format. We brought that in, and you can see how quick and easy that was. That's just going to go ahead and pull in my entire estimate structure. Templates can even include things like unit costs that you've saved, that sort of information, description. So if you do want to save some of that in the template, or if you have that maybe on an Excel sheet that you're already using, it really is super easy to bring in. Now, whether you're starting from scratch or maybe importing from an Excel sheet, what you normally want to do when you get an estimate that is going to work for your company is save that as a template. So we have templates here at UDA that we can provide for you. So if any of you guys would like some of my templates, feel free to send a message in today's webinar or shoot me an email afterwards, and I will be happy to send you the Excel imports that you can use. Any templates that you set up, you'll be able to find in your template section here. But before we do that, let's just take a quick look at how easy it is to actually save an estimate that you're working with as a template. So we're going to come in to the action menu here. We're just going to choose Save as Template. We're going to give this template a name, save it, and it's now going to appear as an option for us when we are creating new estimates from templates. We'll be able to use this one over and over again.
Now, we encounter some slight resistance to turning estimates into templates every once in a while. I'm not going to say it's very common, but Holly, I feel like one of the main reasons why we don't encounter as much resistance is because our staff, and really you and me in particular, hammer home the point of how valuable estimate templates can truly be for even one person working inside of Construction Online, how it can really improve their workflow processes, and how it can reduce mistakes when it comes to actually building out a truly detailed estimate. We really can't emphasize enough how critical it is for you to take all of that hard work that you've done building out a robust estimate for one project and find ways to extend that process out into other projects.
That's right. You can accomplish so much by using estimate templates. It's going to help you be able to produce estimates more quickly without sacrificing accuracy or detail. Usually you have to kind of give up one of those if you're trying to do so. If you were trying to make an estimate by hand, you wouldn't necessarily be able to have it always very easily, something that was really accurate, really detailed, and also really fast to put together. And so we feel like templates really take care of the fast part, the detailed part, and allow you to focus in on the accuracy part. And templates can actually help with that as well when you're doing things like saving in cost. One of the things that we don't want to do when we're creating an estimate is to forget to include things. We don't want to accidentally type in, the wrong cost. We want to have a standard set, and we don't really want in general all of the estimators across our company to do it differently. It's nice to have from a company and growth perspective, you want a standard that everyone can follow so that your proposals have a standard when you're handing those off to clients, and so that you have the confidence of knowing that all those bases are covered. So it really is a way to create a recipe for success and a strong foundation when you're creating an estimate. Now, to create an estimate from a template, which I've done here, we're just going to select that option. So I've just selected choose template. My list of templates will show up here for me. And now I can choose any of these templates that I like to go ahead and get started on my estimate. I have a number of variations saved here for maybe specific types of jobs. Maybe we'll say this one is going to be a light commercial. Go ahead and save that in. And again, just like with the Excel import option, really fast and easy to create and build that estimate. Construction Online is doing so much of the work and heavy lifting for me right now.
That's right. Now, a couple of key points to take away from the estimate template system here is that you can build out a very robust estimate template and then modify or adapt that template into other templates for different types of work. I think a really common example would be the master estimate template for a major remodeling project that then is cut down in some cases for just bathroom work or just kitchen work. From a larger scale perspective, I was speaking with a larger commercial builder yesterday, and we were talking about the similarities between a larger scale hotel build out and some of the things that cross over into condominium builds. A lot of the structure of the estimate is similar, even though the scope and scale of the projects might be different or spread out across multiple buildings instead of one. But the key here is to make sure that your frameworks are versatile enough for your team. And, some of the resistance I encounter is, well, I have, 8 to 10 estimators and they all do things a different way. Well, what we found is that the marginal benefit of allowing that much freedom is completely overwritten when you consider the efficiency and time, saved when everyone is able to work off of a very consistent structure. If everyone can just compromise just a little bit, you'd be fascinated at the results you would get.
Yeah, that's true. Don't make the mistake of building, kind of a process or almost no process, just around the idea that everything has to be so unique. every project is unique, but every project is going to have the same kind of foundational building blocks. And for the differences that inevitably will be there for things that maybe don't fit into categories, the templates are really easy to modify. So we've just used our light commercial template to make this estimate. But if I needed to add in an additional category, I could do that. Or maybe demolition doesn't apply to this job. Maybe I don't need it. I'm just going to delete it out. It's not going to hurt my template. It's just deleting it out for this job so that I can customize the estimate a bit for what I'm doing here as well.
Yeah, that's a really common concern, Holly. I've had some people ask, are we stuck once we've saved a template inside of Construction Online? And I can't help but feel a little bit of, I'm not sure what the term might be, sympathy. Maybe they've worked in another platform that locks them down into only working with this one template, and once it's saved, they can't change it. Well, we're here to tell you that Construction Online is a really powerful and flexible system. And if you've ever been burned in another platform because you can't edit the template after the fact, or you can't edit a specific estimate, that's not a concern in Construction Online.
That's right. Now, as we sort of start to build out the rest, when we look at using our templates, we know that can help us get an enormous head start. It's going to give us a lot of detail to work with. It's going to give us a path forward to success. And the idea here would be learn from each project that you do. You want to be able to repeat the success you've had in the past and the future, and that's really going to allow you to drive your growth in that way. But when it comes to actually filling out the estimate, whether you've created it from a template, from an import, from a blank estimate, structurally what's inside is going to be pretty much the same. So we wanted to take a couple of minutes just to show you guys around the structure of the estimate. Now, to do that, I'm going to take advantage of one of my favorite tools in Construction Online estimating, and that's my full screen mode. Usually when I'm working on an estimate, I need a little bit more space. I want to have plenty of room to work, so I love that our team has built in a full screen feature here. And as we dive into, say, our general requirements section, we'll start to go through what is or can be included for each of these lines that we're working with. So if we're going to just kind of start here in the beginning with our project management, each line will have the class and notes, which we looked at, and our description. This is going to be, by the way, in my advanced estimating view for the estimate. Now, Jordan, I know that you always really love to show people the different views and kind of ways that they can customize working with their Construction Online estimate.
Yeah, that's right. So a really key concept with the estimates in Construction Online is that they are a multi-purpose tool. Not only are you working on the base estimate, right? Your projected costs, potential quotes from subcontractors, how much you're going to pay for different services and materials throughout the job. You're also working on building out the price for the project as well, for client-facing projects, or for what you're planning on billing for at the end of the project, or for our clients who are self-performing the work and are going to retain the property as well. You're still working with a lot of expert-level cost management tools. But that doesn't just stop at the estimate. I think a pretty big misconception with the Construction Online estimates is that they are just estimates, and that's not entirely true. The estimate that we're working on today is going to contain the different costs and prices for this project that we're working on here, but at a certain point you can actually change the view of the estimate, and by changing the view you're actually changing the function of the estimate itself into, let's say for job costing, now we're looking at our budget versus our actual job costs to date. Now, it's a little outside the scope of what we're covering today in terms of how to actually pull the actual cost back in, but do know that the estimate itself really is a large data set or a large database that's going to contain costs, prices, the status, if you would like to track of whether or not you've got bids in or whether you've locked in, a firm price from a subcontractor. We're going to be tracking things like the unit of measure throughout, which looks really great on different reports that you would run. Any tax obligations or extra costs due to sales tax that you might have to pay, depending on your location or not. And what's great about that is throughout the entire estimate, if there's a column that you really want to use, you can actually show and hide a column that you would like to see or not see. So for those of you who are fortunate enough to work in locations where you don't have to allocate tax as an additional cost, well, guess what? You can turn that column off and only focus on the different pieces of the estimate that are important to you. Now, when I'm first working with clients to really give them an understanding of how they can use the estimate. I kind of like to do a left to right flow through just to show how everything fits together. And it really does start with the name. The name is the centering point, or really like the main element of the estimate that drives what the thing is. In this case, maybe we're looking at our project management fees, which is most likely going to be an internal payroll cost. So really, this is important for us to not only lock in, but make sure that we're watching very carefully so that we don't, spend a little bit of extra time here and there, ended up going over budget just because, we were trying to make sure the job was getting taken care of and we got a little lax on our tracking. But in this case, we want to make sure a couple of things. First, we're going to start with classification. We're going to classify whether or not the cost is an internal cost for us, maybe a labor cost, or perhaps this is going to be an equipment rental cost. So we're going to classify that as an equipment cost. Moving right along, we'll start landing into the description column. This allows you to flesh out a little more information about the specific item in question. I've seen a lot of people use the description for specific scopes of work for the project. I've seen it, be used to detail a little more about exactly what project management represents. It's a very versatile field.
It is. One thing that's helpful to know about the description area, and I see a couple of questions coming in from the audience about, internal estimate versus client presentation, is that the description can be included in your proposal. It doesn't have to be. So how you guys choose to use that when you're generating proposals will kind of dictate what you want the purpose of that to be. But the description is something that can be included on a proposal, whereas something like your notes is always going to be internal. So when we're thinking about how to set this up and the difference between some of the different sections that we might work with, those are good things to keep in mind in terms of client presentation. Same thing with your costs. So when we're looking at presenting to a client, you can choose to show them things like quantity or unit costing, but in most cases, you're not going to do that. You'll show them a final price, and in many cases, you'll maybe want to show them a cost breakdown per category as opposed to per line item, which is how you want to estimate and track your cost in the system. As we move through our costing information, some other things that we can track, Jordan, you mentioned earlier taxes, so we'll jump into that in a little bit more detail. We have some tax information here. We also have status, resource, which would typically be the subcontractor or vendor that we plan to use. And if we want to do line item markups, we have those available for us here. Now, this would be a really good time to transition into talking about the importance of using company overhead and margin along with the other markup tools available in your ConstructionOnline estimate to really arrive at a profitability number that makes sense for your company, that makes sense for this project. Now, we've spent some time looking at our project total sheet on the estimate, which is our cover page. Every estimate starts with your project totals sheet. That's going to be a summary of my categories and subcategories. All of my categories are here in the middle. And at the end of every estimate sheet, you'll notice a few that are also flagged in different colors. And we want to focus right now on that company overhead and margin area.
Yeah, that's right. So we touched on the line item markup areas inside of the estimate where you could go through and add in, say, a per item markup to the estimate. But a lot of clients that we work with instead are more used to using below the line company margin calculations. And that's exactly what the company overhead and margin section is for. If you haven't used a tool like this before, you're about to save a ton of time trying to arrive at some type of perfect project margin, trying to play around with your percent markups to get it to calculate out correctly. Because we've built in some really powerful and simple ways to really add in a profit margin calculation to the entire estimate itself. And that really is what the company overhead and margin tool is for. Now, by default, we've built in a few sections for you. There's a place to track your company overhead, to build that in as a percentage of the job cost so that you can actually charge for running your business in addition to running the project itself. We've added in a section to track and build in your own company's profit margin, as well as a space to enter in contingency amounts and a couple of other sections. But what you'll notice is that just like the other sections in the estimate, you can change the name of the different pieces or components here so that if you're more familiar with putting in something like management fee or builder's fee, or if you're more familiar with putting in some type of different language here, maybe there's a specific naming convention or cost code that you're looking to enter, you can put that information in as well. It's very straightforward. And of course, the most straightforward part about this is really defining your company's profit margin. All you have to do is type in your desired profit margin, and ConstructionOnline will do the heavy lifting of that formula to figure out, okay, well, if we want this target percent margin calculation, how are we going to land at that to make sure that 35% of the project's total amount is allocated towards our profit margin? There's a couple of different ways that we've found over the years to simply explain the company margin calculation. I think the simplest, Holly, is to say, look, you want 35% of this project contract to be allocated to profit. Here's the number. This is going to be 35% of the project total price allocated towards your profit margin. Now, of course, you don't show that inside of a proposal. Typically, at this scale, you wouldn't actually show that information, but you could if you wanted to. But we have a lot of options to build that profit margin back into or prorate it throughout the contract proposal. This tool alone can save so much time in trying to calculate and really ensure that you're building the proper amount of profitability into your projects.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Usually this is a better calculation than doing it by line by line by line, because it's giving you a big picture look at what you want the margin to be on the project. And then you can just prorate that throughout when you are presenting to a client. So depending on the type of contract you have, you may be more or less transparent with that. Another way that this particular tool can help you from a financial perspective is kind of using the different calculation types. So every time we do an estimating or profitability webinar, we always like to touch on this. Many of you will know kind of where I'm going with the different calculation values, but it's a hard lesson that I've talked to so many contractors over the years who kind of had a moment where they realized they have been doing their markups not the incorrect way. So the thing is, when you're looking at doing a profit margin, that's going to be actually, just from a mathematical standpoint, it's a different calculation than adding a markup. So when we kind of think about how that affects the project, the percent of cost calculation method is where we take our base cost, multiply it times a markup percentage, say maybe 10%, add those two numbers together, and that's what we charge the client. Now, the thing there is that that's not a terrible way to do it, especially with cost plus. That's usually the way it's done. But with that, your profit margin is actually not going to be that 10%. It's going to be a little bit lower. What the percent margin calculation does is it allows us to look ahead to the price that we're charging the client and say, we want to ensure that the final price we're charging is actually this percentage. It has this percentage built in as profit margin. So when you are kind of thinking about this, if this is something that you have to go through and calculate by hand, or are not really sure how the calculations work, this can be a really big, kind of financial tool to use. And it's something that is a really common misconception about how to do those calculations, or how to kind of end up getting the actual margin you want off of your projects, not just knowing that you've marked it up by a certain amount.
Yeah, final word on this comes from someone in the audience actually who says, margin is the only way to stay in business.
We agree.
And in the majority of cases, absolutely 100%. Now, for those of you who are performing some type of cost plus fee estimate, the type of calculation that you're looking for actually is the percent of cost calculation. That's where you're going to expose the actual calculations. I found that that's typically where people are aiming when they're running that. But for the majority of clients that we work with, we found that the percent margin calculation is the most important setting really to set in the template that you're working with, period, to make sure that the calculations are truly coming ahead in your favor.
Yeah, that's right. Now, before we jump into some of the other options, your other choice here on this page is going to be to use a fixed amount. So this is where you want to just charge a flat dollar amount added on to the end of the estimate. It's a great place to put something like a contingency, a management fee. Even a lot of people kind of feel like they get ConstructionOnline for free because they just build in a small little fee at the end that's a flat rate, kind of per project for their jobs. So you have some different ways that you can use both the different calculation methods and your fixed amounts to kind of help us build out what we want. Now, you may have a need in addition to this to apply some different types of markup, and you do have that option within ConstructionOnline as well. So this company overhead and margin page is really focused on all of these calculations happening based on the subtotal of the estimate thus far. It's going to include your allowance amounts. It's going to include things that are happening on these category sheets. But what we want to take a look at now is, what if we wanted to come in and perhaps set some markups that would go based on our classification assignments. So a really, really common use case that I see here is going to be a situation where, from a labor burden perspective, anything that's internal labor, you might want to mark up by an additional percentage, not necessarily the whole estimate, but only those items flagged as labor perhaps. Or maybe there's a material markup that you want to use. So you can actually come into your estimate options, head over to the markups area, and go ahead and set a percentage markup that will apply based on the classification of those items.
Yeah, it's really simple. All you have to do is type in a percentage that you're aiming for. You'll want to make sure, if you are wanting to apply this percentage to existing items in the estimate, that you make sure you check the box to update existing items in the estimate. Otherwise, you're just setting this up for future items you would add into the estimate. But this goes all the way back to when Holly was adding in different classification settings throughout the estimate. Now that we've done this, anywhere we've actually tagged an item with a labor classification, which, if I remember, I think we're back in our general requirements section here. Anywhere we've actually set a labor setting throughout the estimate is now going to have a classification markup applied. What's also great about this is if you had a classification markup set and you needed to tweak that number for whatever reason, we could go back into that same estimate options menu, change the percent markup, apply it throughout the entire estimate, and get right back to it. This is really helpful if for whatever reason you wanted to generate 2 or 3 what-if type proposals for a client. You can produce those very quickly.
Now, the other thing you can do here just to fine-tune that markup is if there are certain items or sections that you need to mark up really as a one-off. Maybe we know that for a certain category or subcategory on the estimate, we just need to apply some sort of additional markup. We want it to be just for this one item or just for this one section. You can come in and do that individually on a line-by-line basis, either as a percentage, a flat dollar amount, or a flat dollar amount per unit if you're doing quantity and unit costing. So it can be a great way to really fine-tune the markup on the estimate, because our end goal here is to make sure that not only do you have a really wonderful detailed estimate that's accurate, but to remember that part of accuracy in estimating is going to be building in the profitability that your company needs. If you're not doing that, the estimate isn't actually, in fact, as accurate as it needs to be. So that's kind of the goal here. So you have a ton of tools at your disposal to be able to fine-tune that. Next, we wanted to jump in and show you guys how to set tax rates for your materials, services, or other taxes that you may have to track. Now, I know from clients that I've had a chance to work with that, we work with people all over the world. So in certain countries, there's definitely different types of requirements about tax disclosure, and not only how taxes have to be applied, but the awareness that a client needs to have about them. And then we see that sometimes here in the States with different states having different requirements, as well as varieties in how different contractors choose to handle taxes. And we're all going to pay sales taxes on things like materials that are being purchased. So how are we handling that? Are we building that into the line items, which a lot of people do, or is that being managed separately? So we've got some options for you to manage that inside your ConstructionOnline estimate if you choose to do so.
Yeah, and not only are they some options, there's some really powerful options. We've built in a very, very flexible tax allocation and tax tracking system inside of ConstructionOnline. Now, what we're looking at here inside of the tax type dropdown is really based on some of those settings that we've kind of danced around up until this point. When we first were making an estimate from scratch, we had an option to define our tax percentages and tax setup at that time, our tax structure. I think in the UK, for instance, it's called a tax scheme, which is an interesting choice of words. But here in the United States, for instance, we've set up some fairly general tax options based on the majority of the United States, at least the majority of the clients that we've worked with to date. Now, when we open up the menu here, we can see we can set a tax percentage, not only for our material items that we're going to be tagging throughout the estimate, but we can also break down the taxes to meet the regional and let's say even the local tax requirements in some cases of our state or location. Now, what's great about this, though, is that just because you set the settings here for this one estimate, that doesn't mean that it's locked in place for every estimate and every template you do moving forward. If you're doing work or performing work in multiple states or multiple counties or multiple localities that have different tax structures and tax requirements, you can adjust those on the fly for whatever region you're working in. It's a really flexible tool. Now, speaking of working in other regions, I actually was working with a client in Canada this morning, Holly, and we were discussing how he was surprised that we actually had allocations for the different tax structures in Canada, especially that we had a section for the PST, which I think stands for provincial sales tax. I might have just destroyed all my credibility by using a wrong word there. But he said it was refreshing that we'd actually thought about it and done our research, because he's spoken with other software vendors before, and it was like speaking ancient Greek. They just had no idea what he was trying to do. Right. It's a really flexible system. And if there's a certain structure that doesn't apply to you in our default list here, but that you really, really need, let's say like a gross receipts tax if you're working out of New Mexico or something like that, or maybe it's Arizona, one of the two, you can actually set up your own tax types, which I think it truly is the beauty of this piece here. Whatever the case is, you can account for it inside of ConstructionOnline, which is going to help you along the path to building a truly accurate estimate.
It definitely will. Now, a couple of things to note here. So you have different region or country settings that you can apply. They're going to give you some of those predefined options. You can see how easy it was for me to add in my own tax type. And then one other thing that's really helpful to know is that with the taxes, you can choose a calculation method. We know that this varies sometimes pretty drastically between different states. So you can do a tax then markup calculation. So we can calculate the tax first, then calculate the markup on top of that. We can do the opposite, where we do a markup then tax. I know that this is required in certain countries. So I've got clients that I work with, where this is a requirement. You have to pay taxes on your markup. And then you could also choose to do tax and markup separately, which just means that each of those are going to be calculated independently against the base cost of that item. So you've got a ton of great options here. Tax settings are also something that you can apply to your change orders and your selection. So I think this is a really great time to jump in and take a look at managing and integrating your change orders and selections into the estimate, which I think is a really great system in terms of how ConstructionOnline handles this. So both change orders and selections have their own module. So they have their own module within ConstructionOnline that you can work with. So you can see they have their own pages where we're really setting up things like client presentation. We're going to add photographs. We're going to add a ton of details here. So it really is a module for managing those change orders and selections. But because we know that those don't exist in a vacuum outside of the budget, they're actually integrated right into your estimate as well. So we have different places where you can see the same information, one more independently, one more so as it relates to estimates that we're working with. So for example, we're actually going to jump over into just a different project for a moment, since it's got some selections and some change orders going, and take a look at what that looks like on our estimate tabs.
And just like the company overhead and margin tab we looked at a moment ago, the selections or allowances and change orders are all going to appear at the very end of the estimate.
So here we have our selection sheet, which is going to be structured very similar to our estimate sheets in the sense that we have our categories for our selections or allowances. Then we have the actual selections, and then you can also add an allowance amount in here. One thing that's really nice here is that we can also add this information right here on this page. So if I needed to add a brand new category, maybe for paint color or something like that, I could go ahead and just add it in. And Construction Online selections are flexible enough to both allow you to work with an allowance or without. So I talk to people all the time. Everybody has really different ways and really strong feelings about the best way to do selections or allowances. But Construction Online is really going to be flexible enough to handle both of those. If we are assigning allowance amounts to the selections here, those are going to add up. So I'll be able to see my total for allowances that I've assigned to this estimate. And that's going to show up in things like my financial summary dashboard here at the top. That's going to show up when I'm looking at my selections page. That can even show in your client portal if you'd like to share that with your client to say, hey, here's what you started with from an allowance perspective. Here's maybe any overages we've encountered. So it does a really nice job of tracking that. And you can see all of that right here on the estimate sheet as well. So I can see which ones are still pending, the approved amounts, and if there was a net over under on those selections as well.
And not just for each selection itself, but also for the selection categories. So we can see the over under or the net for our appliance section. And we can see the net overage or underage for the entire project when we're getting ready to close out the project at the very bottom as well. And the same is true for change orders. Another common question is, okay, well, if I'm looking for the change order amounts, is there a way I can just see all of this in a spreadsheet format? And the answer is, well, of course, that's exactly what the change orders tab is built for.
Exactly. Now, just like with the selections, we can see, all of our statuses, and we can also actually create change orders right from this sheet as well. So we don't necessarily have to go to the change order module to do that. If we need to add in a new change order, we can do that from this page. We can do that from our change order page. It's all going to integrate seamlessly together, so we're always looking at that same data. One thing that's nice to know as well about change orders is that you can actually link those to the estimate. So we're just going to step through what that would look like if we're making a new change order. So we'll just call this basement upgrade here.
Maybe it was going to be unfinished, but now they've decided, well, you know what, we found it in our budget. Surprise!
Right, wonderful. Now, as we're filling this out, the only thing that's really required is that I give the change order a name. I usually always like to track as well the type so that I can go back and do some analytics on that later. Maybe the reason for the change, in this case, it's going to be a client request, and we'll go ahead and give this a due date of 1 week away. Now, as we get into the next step and start looking at the price, this is where you're actually able to start building out the change order. One really cool thing that we've added this year in 2020 is the ability to do both lump sum and detailed change orders. So with lump sum, we're just going to assign a lump cost to this change order. Maybe it's going to be $15,000 and that's it. Or if we use the detailed change order method, we can actually come in and build out a little mini estimate for this basement upgrade. So we might want to list out some additional materials, additional labor, new things that need to be added here. So we can go ahead and really provide a little bit more detail on the change order. Now, however we are costing this out, just like in your estimate, you can do, a unit cost and quantity, or you can just, kind of enter in some information. But for each of these lines, we can actually link this back to different places in the estimate, which is going to affect that job costing view that we looked at earlier. So if we're doing this, maybe this is going to add additional cost for framing. This might add additional cost for foundation. So we're going to say, some additional concrete materials here for this one. Maybe this one is going to be, additional doors and windows. We need another exterior door here, some more interior doors, however you've broken that down, you can actually tag it back to your estimate, which is going to allow you to see some really detailed information from a job costing perspective. Of course, you'll notice here that I actually forgot to include my markup. So markup, the company overhead and margin, is not going to apply to change orders. That's what's helping us set our contract price. Change order is coming after that. But Construction Online does warn you if you have forgotten your markup, so that you can go ahead and get that added in appropriately. Or
you can skip it. That's up to you.
Normally, though, you're going to want to get paid for those change orders, right? So it's nice to go ahead and add that in. Now, if we just go ahead and save our new change order here, one thing that you'll be able to see is as we're looking at things like, let's see, maybe we want to look at windows and doors. You can see that we have in our job costing view, you're going to be able to have some additional columns. So you have this CO cost column, which is going to be cost without markup that's coming from a change order. And so that's actually going to add into your adjusted cost. So you're going to have your base cost plus or minus any adjustments, taxes, or change orders to arrive at your adjusted cost. So this is going to be your cost basis. If we're looking at something like an invoicing view where our focus is a little bit more on the client's price, then we're going to be able to see, again, that original contract price for that section, any change orders that have impacted that based on those links from the change orders, and then the total adjusted price for that section. So you're going to be able to see that on the estimate sheet. You'll also see those numbers reflected in job costing reports that you run in ConstructionOnline, or different dashboards that you might look at here where we're looking at a remaining balance. You know, how much of our budget have we used for each of these? We're going to be looking at that from an adjusted cost perspective, which is going to include those change orders.
That's right. It's going to include approved change orders, a really key concept here. It wouldn't be very helpful of a dashboard if it was including the pending change orders that weren't approved. So, some things to keep in mind there.
That's right. Now, I think we've covered most of the big topics or sections that we wanted to cover today, but I will say that we've had record attendance this afternoon, so thank you guys for being here. And with that has come a lot of really wonderful questions, so I think we've got about 10 minutes to be able to go through and answer some of these questions, which I just really love to see coming in. One of the questions I see here is, how does this estimate then get turned into a proposal? And that's a great question because it's really what happens next and what gets presented externally. This estimate is an internal sort of living, breathing financial management tool throughout the entire project, but we need a way to be able to present that to our clients. And so we're going to do that by creating a proposal, which would be found in our financial reports section here.
Now, for those of you who joined our previous webinar where we were showing off some new functions and features inside of ConstructionOnline, we just wrapped up a really productive series of a couple of months where we were putting out update after update. Of course, covering some of the proposal basics before we jump into some of our new updates here. Right off the bat, you've got a couple of options. You can either generate a very simple proposal. This is if you're in, let's say, a hurry and you just want to produce a really quick, simple proposal that doesn't have a lot of options, and it's really nicely formatted for clients who maybe aren't going to scrutinize every single item in the estimate, this is the winner here. You can see that the proposal is going to do a great job of pulling in your company information and your company logo, which you can set inside of ConstructionOnline. If you haven't done that already, you should definitely do that. And it's going to load in information from the estimate itself. But we've had so many requests to allow people to put in their own proposal or contract language. And what we've done to address this is we've built out a new default text function here that lets you set up all sorts of useful text blocks that you can insert into your proposals, into your potential contracts, into change order proposals and change order contracts, into purchase orders that can be generated from ConstructionOnline. Really, the system is incredibly flexible, and you can see, of course, we've built in a lot of options here. We've built in a lot of options into the proposal as well. Our advice is if you're interested in making something happen with the proposal system in ConstructionOnline, give it a shot. Play around with a few of the settings, and we think you'll be very pleasantly surprised at how easy and at how professionally produced the resulting proposal will become.
Some common questions on the proposal front, since we're looking at this, would be, what about, are my clients going to see that overhead and margin that we've worked so hard to build into the estimate? And you definitely can display those as separate line items. Many will choose to go ahead, though, and take advantage of that prorate option, wherein we just prorate the overhead and margin throughout the contract so that you can show some of that information to your clients without them seeing these individual lines. You can also choose the level of detail you want to include here. So do we want to give them categories, subcategories, and line items? or maybe not. Maybe we just want to do categories and subcategories. And then same thing here with our price detail. Do we want to give them pricing per each individual subcategory, or maybe just at the category level, do we want to actually show some sort of costing information? So you have the power to sort of decide what the client is going to see. You can also include sections for things like class totals, taxes. You can decide whether to include things that you haven't assigned a quantity to just yet. So tons of great options here. And then of course you'll just go ahead and create that. And Jordan, I love your advice to just play around with it a little bit. There are so many options that, if you're unsure of what you want to do, you can definitely do that. I built in some additional text that I want in my document, so we've included that here. And then we'll get into the proposal information, which is going to give me a summary per each category, and then I'll have a place for my client to sign off here at the end. Now let's see, we also had someone someone ask here, what is the best way to create multiple templates for different types of construction while also using the same items or chart of accounts from a QuickBooks integration perspective? So ConstructionOnline integrates really well with QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online, so you can integrate with either of those systems. And when we integrate with QuickBooks, what we are doing when we send this estimate to QuickBooks is we are looking for a matching item in the items list. If we find it, we will use that one in QuickBooks. If we don't find it, it's just going to create another one for you. So for that reason, many people do like to keep it consistent with how their items are named so that it's not creating tons of new items in QuickBooks, but rather using that existing items list. Now, I have a couple of suggestions, and I know, Jordan, you do too, when it comes to taking advantage of this. My first recommendation would be, if we're looking at maybe different types of jobs, would be to just simply create one master template with all of those items. And then for certain subsets of those jobs, maybe go through and delete what is not needed, resave that as a new template for certain job types. So like, for example, you might have one that's whole home remodels versus one that's just bath or kitchen. You could save that however you wanted. I think that's going to be the easiest way to get multiple templates, and that's really easy to accomplish. If I wanted to come in and maybe I don't need a couple of sections here on this estimate, I can really just come in and delete entire sections that I don't need, and then when I'm done, I'm just going to do save as template, give it a new name for that subset of jobs, and that's really all I need to do.
Yeah, this is a fairly complex question in a way, because it depends on the way that you want to format your cost codes or your items, I would say. But the short answer is it's so flexible that as long as you're consistent with the choice of the decisions that you make, and you're not constantly changing the structure of your estimates for each individual, let's say, construction job type. Like, let's say that you have a division that does electrical work and a division that does plumbing work, and then you have a general construction division as well. Well, the thing is, your general construction work, right, that's probably going to include a plumbing and electrical section in the estimate. Why not break out a larger scale estimate into smaller estimate templates for each type of work for those other divisions? And then you can, of course, expand and flesh out the line items inside of the estimate to cover the unique components for, let's say, the more specialized divisions, without affecting the overall connection point to QuickBooks. But this actually cycles into another question that someone had just asked about line item details. Like, well, what if we wanted to put in multiple details about breaking down, let's say, the dimensions for baseboard and a couple of other elements as well? And that really is where the line item view inside of our 3-level estimates comes into play. So if you actually drill down into a category, we're looking into planning here, but let's say we wanted to drill even further in and look at something like our exterior windows and doors, so we could break down different maybe door sizes, door dimensions, door models. In this case, we're looking at overhead doors, so garage doors, what's going to be included here, et cetera, et cetera. This is really the space for that. This also flows into a separate question about, well, what if we wanted to put in scopes of work for line items and then have all of that flow into our proposal, right? So we're working with a couple of pieces here. The line items are going to be your friend for that very granular breakdown, especially for those clients that just have to see everything before they'll sign the dotted line, right? Well, this is the space and the place for you to really detail out that scope of work for those really maybe high-end clients, or those clients who have experience in the industry. They want to make sure that you know what you're doing in some cases. And we've worked with clients who have those clients, and the tool is here for you to achieve that.
That's
whatever
right.
detail you want to put into the estimate is great. And of course, going back to the proposal options that we had, we could actually set this up so that we're showing the level of detail down to the line items, so that we can share the descriptions that we're going to fill in here for our line items. But we can reduce the price detail down to just show the price for categories or subcategories. So we can kind of give them a big, maybe, just a sheet of information of everything we're going to be working on, but keep the price a lot, higher level, so they're not trying to shop around and show other people your estimate and figure out, oh, can you do this piece for cheaper, right?
Yeah.
You have a lot of control over the presentation of your proposals to your clients or potential clients.
Definitely. So the description is a great way to get some of that in there as well. Even if you decide not to include the line items on the proposal, a short description. One example, and we've received kind of several different variations of this same question, so I know a lot of you are sort of wondering about this. But one variation of this is, what if we just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what's included in the price for that line or that section. If you're going to show the line items on the proposal, do it here. If you're going to only show subcategories, you want to do it on the subcategory level, still in that description field, and then just include the descriptions. Description really is a great sort of stand-in for scope of work here. A lot of people use the description as more of an external, digestible scope of work for the client to understand, and then use things like detailed notes and specifications internally for their team. Now, we've had several people chat in asking about where they can get different templates. So for you guys, I see your questions. We'll make sure to flag those and follow up with you after the webinar, but definitely have like the ones that we've been looking at on today's session available to send your way. We also have someone who asked, hey, I heard that you're going to be adding a price list database. Is this true? And it definitely is. So that's something we're super excited about. We will be returning for a fall series of webinars in a couple of weeks here, and that'll be one of the things that we'll be highlighting for all of you is the brand new price or cost database that you'll be able to use in conjunction with your estimates and in conjunction with your takeoff tool as well. So we are really excited about that. That's definitely coming your way.
Yeah, there's another question asking about our takeoff function as well, which is sitting right there at the very end of our major feature groups inside the project. You can see where it says takeoff. Our team has been very hard at work tying up the final pieces to connect the redline takeoff functions to the estimate inside of your project, so that you can do all sorts of really interesting things, like taking the square footage for, let's say, some type of floor covering or carpeted area and tying that back into your quantities in the estimate, or vice versa, working through the estimate while you're working through your takeoffs as well. I mean, the tool is going to be such an incredible piece of, honestly, efficiency to build into your company. We really can't wait to show it off, but we are definitely working on some really interesting items database functions, RS means cost book functions, tying in the takeoff outputs back into the estimate. If you felt like you made it through today and you still didn't have enough to learn, we have more coming for you, don't worry.
We have one more question here to cover. Maybe have time for one more before we wrap up. Someone wants to know, is it possible to add a section for like lien information or something like that on the contract? And it definitely is. That goes back to those default blocks of text really that you can add in. Those do not have to be just for terms and conditions. That can really be for anything. I actually have some UDA contracts that I've used and just decided to drop some of those in here, so you can actually really flesh out the information that you're including on these proposals. So if you want to have a lien section that you're adding in, you can go ahead and do that either to your general terms, or you can kind of create one of these text blocks to just drop in to not only proposals, but other things you can do with the estimate within the financial reports. We can take this information and now turn it into things like purchase order documents or quote request or materials list and all sorts of job costing reports. And so you'll be able to use those blocks of text for all sorts of purposes. So you definitely add that in. Now, it looks like we still have questions remaining, but are actually just running out of time today. So if we have not been able to get to your question, feel free to reach out to either Jordan or myself, or any of our product specialists here at UDA are happy to work with you. We love working with you guys, so please feel free to reach out with your questions directly. But until next time, thank you so much for spending some of your time with us this afternoon. And we hope to see you at the next one.
That's right. We're going to be bringing a lot of exciting new things to the table in a couple of weeks. So until then, we hope you all stay healthy, successful, and profitable. Until next time.